Today we are back looking at tag, the transcendental argument for God, and specifically we are looking at Matt Slick's formulation of it. What's underneath this argument? Incredulity, seeing agency behind mindless processes, and special pleading. Let's go! Hi, my name is Scarlett, and I'm an atheist and skeptic, and yeah, tag. It's an argument that basically says that a God is needed for the universe to be understandable by us and for us to understand it. Basically, God is the maker of the laws of the universe and has given us a piece of his mind, literally, to be able to make sense of it. Slick's argument is very long-winded, and I hope to make sense of it before the heat death of the universe. I can see why people wouldn't want to tackle it line by line. As I was preparing this video, I couldn't help but be struck by how this argument is akin to the fine-tuning or the design argument. At base, I think there are several misunderstandings at play. First, that everything has some kind of thingness to it, like Platonic forms that God has imbued. I have the impression that the fact that atoms or molecules clump together and stay there and have attributes that we can perceive is a mystery to Slick. Something must be behind the fact that things have an identity. There must be an agent making it all happen. Second, there's an argument from incredulity. Slick needs an accounting for why things have an identity that we perceive, and that is his God. How else could it all be explained? Third, special pleading. The universe and its physical laws need an accounting for, a why it all exists, and a why it exists in a way that we can understand it. But God is the thing that doesn't need to be accounted for. Why does God exist? And why does he do what he does? It's a mystery. So enough blibbity blab. Before we get to the long-ass version, let's just remember the short form that Slick gives us. 1. Logical absolutes exist, which I'm fine with certain caveats, as we'll see. 2. Logical absolutes are concepts. I'm fine with the first part, but not with the extension that they are not the product of the physical universe. Without a physical universe, there would be nothing, and these, were they to exist, would have no value at all. 3. They can't be the product of human minds because our minds are not absolute, but they must be from a God. I think this is slippery language here. I don't know why our finite brains can't detect that things are what they are and that there are constants, but it's a mystery to Slick. And 4, because Slick can say God produced absolutes and atheists can only shrug, he wins because he has accounted for these logical absolutes and atheists haven't. Now the long form. As we get started, it's worth noting the numbering system. Slick uses only Arabic numerals, where I might have chosen to start at the top level with Roman numerals, then go down to uppercase letters, then Arabic numerals, and then lowercase letters if needed, but he just uses Arabic numerals, so we see here 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, and I'll do my best to say when we're at the top again, when we're at the top layer of all of this numbering, because with the screen caps it can be hard to see. Having said that, we're at the top level, number 1, logical absolutes. Under that we have the law of identity. Something is what it is and isn't what it is not. Something that exists has a specific nature. I don't have a problem with this as long as we understand that the way we call things, our naming conventions, are human designations, and we have decided to categorize things, and we have determined what nature is important to us, like what is applicable to us as humans. Number 2, for example, a cloud is a cloud, not a rock. A fish is a fish, not a car. So I do want to point out that in these examples that Slick has given, these are things in the universe, obviously, that we are describing and that have an identity. Without a universe, they wouldn't have any identity. I also want to note that these are all things in process, like a cloud is a part of a cycle, and as long as we're talking about, we're capturing a snapshot when the cloud is a cloud and when it is not dissipated because it has rained or snowed or however, that's fine. We have decided that this part of the water cycle is a cloud. Rock is the same. We're capturing a moment of those molecules' existence. They might have started life as sediment that accumulated and then hardened, or it could have started life as magma that also hardened. A fish is a being that will die at some point, and those molecules will go back. So we're capturing these snapshots. And then, of course, a car is a man-made thing in the universe. Okay, fine. Things have an identity and a nature. Number 2, Law of non-contradiction. Something cannot be both true and false at the same time in the same sense. And number 2 under that, for example, to say that the cloud is not a cloud would be a contradiction, since it would violate the first law. The cloud cannot be what it is and not what it is at the same time. And I'm fine with this, once again, as we understand that we're capturing a snapshot when the cloud is a cloud, not before or after. Okay, we're fine. But I guess I just want to point out that these are natural processes. There's always a process. Things are always changing, and what we're doing is capturing a moment. We're calling that the cloud. Fine. Number 3, law of excluded middle. Number 1, a statement is either true or false without a middle ground. Now, I don't know that that's true. There may be things that are slightly true or slightly false, but we're going to keep going. Number 2 under this says, I am alive is either true or false. You are pregnant is either true or false. Now, this alive, keep in mind that we have definitions for these things. And so one of the things that pops into my mind is a virus alive? This is something that science has been talking about, is what constitutes life. And there is a definition for what is life. One of my commenters also asked, are prions alive? So we have to define these things. So basically, I don't know that this is as absolute as he's stating here. But let's go down his number 1, note 1. This statement is false, is not a valid statement, not logically true, since it is self-refuting and is dealt with by the law of non-contradiction. Therefore, it does not fall under the lem category, since it is a self-contradiction. I don't have anything to say about that. Number 2, note 2, if we were to ignore note 1, then there is a possible paradox here. The sentence, this statement is false, does not fit this law, since if it is true, then it is false. Paradoxes occur only when we have absolutes. Nevertheless, the lem is valid except for the paradoxical statement cited. Is it true that paradoxes only occur when we have absolutes? I'd have to think about that. It just seems to me we have to have a definition that we agree upon, and then we can create these paradoxes. I don't know, maybe I'm missing something here. And then 3, note 3, if we again ignore note 1 and admit a paradox, then we must acknowledge that paradoxes exist only within the realm of absolutes. And like I've said, I don't know that. I think that we just have to have conventional definitions for things, and we can have paradoxes because we're just playing with words at this point. That's kind of what these things are doing. We're not really pointing to reality, we're playing with meanings. And we humans can do that. All right, we're popping back out to a top level. This would be Roman numeral 2 if I were numbering this. Logical absolutes are truth statements such as 1, that which exists has attributes and a nature. Okay, fine. Number 1 under that, a cloud exists and has the attributes of whiteness, vapor, etc. It has the nature of water and air. I'm not 100% sure of his attributes here. Does the cloud have whiteness? And I'm assuming he's meaning one particular cloud that we would perceive as white. It has a consistency that when it reflects light, we call that white, but I don't know that it has whiteness. Color is just the effect of light hitting things, and the things have certain atoms in them, certain components, and then when the light reflects, we perceive the color. I mean, clouds are vapor, right? They're part of the water cycle. All right, let's go on. Number 2, a rock is hard, heavy, and is composed of its rock material, granite, marble, sediment, etc. I like how he gives specific kinds of rock, but then goes to sediment, as opposed to telling us a sedimentary rock. Rocks don't have to be heavy, and I guess it depends on what you mean by hard. Most of us think that rocks are hard. And yeah, rocks are composed of their rock material, keeping in mind again that these things are in a process, but we're capturing a moment. I'm willing to entertain that we are marking a moment along this process, and the rock is not always going to be the rock. It hasn't always been there, and it will not always be there. It is a moment in time. All right, moving on. Number 2, something cannot be itself and not itself at the same time. Number 1, it cannot be true to state that a rock is not a rock. I mean, at base, this is saying that a clump of molecules is what it is, and we've named it something, and it's not another clump of molecules, which is fine. 3, something cannot bring itself into existence. I find it very strange that this is here, and I would agree that something cannot bring itself into existence, but things can come into existence based on the conditions and the physical processes of the universe. Let's see what Slick has to say. One, in order for something to bring itself into existence, it has to have attributes in order to perform an action. But if it has attributes, then it already has existence. If something does not exist, it has no attributes and can perform no actions. Therefore, something cannot bring itself into existence. Which I'm fine with this. It's just I don't think that that's a good descriptor for our universe. Like I just said, there are conditions and physical processes, and things form, and nobody forms them. They're sort of brought into existence. But I also am thinking, what about God? Does God have an attribute? Did he bring himself into existence? Oh, I'm sorry, he's the thing that always existed, right? Right. All right, let's go on. Number 4, truth is not self-contradictory. And the point 1 under this, it could not be true that you are reading this and not reading this at the same time in the same sense. It is either true or false that you are reading this. And I'll grant this, truth is just what it is. It is the thing that corresponds to reality. Number 5, therefore, logical absolutes are absolutely true. I'm not sure where this therefore came in. I mean, he's just been naming things that are logical absolutes. And isn't it a tautology? You're calling them logical absolutes, so they have to be absolute, right? Or is it just me? Anyway, he goes on. They are not subjectively true. That is, they're not sometimes true and sometimes false, depending on preference or situation. Otherwise, they would not be absolute. Well, okay, fine, but isn't the opposite of subjectively objectively? And things can be objective without being absolute, like they can only exist for a certain amount of time, whereas absolutes, I would think, are kind of permanent. But anyway, yeah, this is just a tautology. They're called logical absolutes. They have to be absolute. If they exist, they have to be absolute. And I'm fine with saying that things are what they are and we can understand them, which I think is what this is really getting to. Let's keep going. Number 3, we're back out at the top level, Roman numeral 3. Logical absolutes form the basis of rational discourse. I'm not sure about this one at all, because to me what forms the basis of rational discourse is the fact that we as humans have language that we apply to things. I guess the things we're talking about are what they are, and we've named them and categorized them, but the rational discourse is more than just that things are what they are, right? There is the language and the naming convention, the categorization, and that can be a little tricky because our language is imperfect. All right, but let's just grant it. Okay, logical absolutes. Things are what they are and we can point to them. I guess that's what we're actually saying. Number 1 under this, if the logical absolutes are not absolute, then truth cannot be known. Well, I have news for you. Whether or not the truth can be known is a huge debate in philosophy. I've lost track of the times my philosopher friends have talked about whether or not we can know truth and whether truth exists, and in the absence of anybody thinking about it, does the universe absolutely exist? It's very interesting to me that somebody can just throw this out there. If by the truth cannot be known, you simply mean we cannot discover the universe, which is separate from knowing the truth, then I can grant you that. If there's not an identity to things, then we can't discover the identity. That's the simple thing. But I think it's a bit far-fetched to talk about truth being able to be known or not. Very anti-philosophical. Number 2, if the logical absolutes are not absolute, then no rational discourse can occur. Point number 1 under this. For example, I could say that a square is a circle, violating the law of identity, or that I am and am not alive in the same sense at the same time, violating the law of non-contradiction. And point 2 under that, but no one would expect to have a rational conversation with someone who spoke in contradictory statements. Well, one of the problems is we're talking, first of all, about language. And we can say these things, and we can play with them, and that's the basis of some poetry and jokes and riddles and things like that. There is the thing that is a square or the thing that is a circle, and then there's the name for that and the fact that we can determine what this is, and we can play with that. And what I would say here, it's more than just that things are what they are and they're not what they're not that is at play here. It is also that we have language that we apply to that, and we determine that this thing with 4 sides is a square and the round thing is a circle, and our language can be imperfect and imprecise. But I guess at base, things have to be what they are. I guess that's what we're just simply saying, this thing of things have to be what they are for us to be able to talk about them, which, okay. Number 3, if logical absolutes are not always true, then it might be true that something can contradict itself, which would make truth unknowable and rational discourse impossible. But saying that something can contradict itself can't be true. We've already made this point, so let's move on. Number 4, but since we know things are true, I exist, you're reading this, then we can conclude that logical statements are true. Otherwise, we would not be able to rationally discuss or know truth. I think we've already dealt with this. Number 5, if they are not the basis of rational discourse, then we cannot know truth or error, since the laws that govern rationality are not absolute. This would allow people to speak irrationally, i.e. blue sleeps faster than Wednesday. I think this is a very repetitive piece of his argument, and what I find funny is you can speak like this. Like, that's the basis of a lot of really fun, like, Dadaist and Surrealist poetry, is to have this irrationality. But it's not just because that things are what they are. It is that we give meaning to words, and then the words can be evocative of things that are not true. And I have to say, even without the absolutes, I think that we could have a convention to language that we would still be able to speak in both rational and irrational ways. I just also want to point out that I think that this is a nonsensical sentence to prove the point that he's trying to make here, because he's just playing with language. Like the color, which doesn't do anything, it can't sleep, that's what animals do, we sleep, and faster, how quick you do something. And of course, Wednesday is the name of a day of the week, and weeks don't actually exist. That's a convention that humans came up with. I actually think it would make more sense to say things that, like, one day a cloud is what we call a cloud, part of the rain cycle, and then suddenly it became a rock, or vice versa. A rock flew into the air and became a cloud and started to rain. That, I think, would demonstrate more what he's talking about, that things don't have a thingness to them that we can point to, and they can change their thingness, that they can become something different. Here, this is just language play. It's a lot of fun, but it really isn't relevant to what he's talking about. All right, moving on. Next, number 4, this would be Roman numeral 4, if it were up to me. Logical absolutes are transcendent. So what do we mean by that? 1, logical absolutes are not dependent on space. Number 1 under that, they do not stop being true dependent on location. If we travel 1,000,000 light years in a direction, logical absolutes are still true. Have no problem with that. Things are what they are no matter where you are. Fine. 2, logical absolutes are not dependent on time. 1, they do not stop being true dependent on time. If we travel 1,000,000,000 years in the future or past, logical absolutes are still true. I like how there's a lot of repetition in here. This isn't a formal proof, and it doesn't really elucidate anything more. Just repeat the title and move on. But fine, yeah, they're not dependent on time. Great. 3, logical absolutes are not dependent on people. That is, they're not the product of human thinking. This is a place I don't agree. I think we absolutely need people, because we're going to see he's going to call them concepts, and concepts are products of minds which belong to people for now. Maybe there are other beings in the universe. If you want to say that it does not depend on an individual mind, fine, it's all people's minds. And if you want to say that we don't literally produce it, we've just seen it, noted it, and written it down, that's fine. But we absolutely do need people. They do depend on people. Under this, we have 1, people's minds are different. What one person considers to be absolute may not be what another considers to be absolute. People often contradict each other, therefore logical absolutes cannot be the product of human contradictory minds. But they still can. Just because people don't agree, that doesn't mean that they aren't absolute, or that somebody can't note that they're absolute. You still need minds to come up with it. 2, if logical absolutes were the product of human minds, they would cease to exist if people cease to exist, which would mean they would be dependent on human minds. But this cannot be so per the previous point. Well, I think that they absolutely need humans thinking about it. As far as we know, humans are the only ones with minds to conceive of these things, to create the concept. So these absolutely do depend on humans, and if humans were to disappear, there would be no mind to note that things are what they are, that the logical absolutes are a thing. Just that things would exist potentially. I mean, this is something that I've heard philosophers dispute, but there just would be nobody to note what they are, what their attributes are. Okay, let's go. Popping back out to the upper level 5. Logical absolutes are not dependent on the material world. And this is again where I disagree. If there's no material world, there is nothing to describe. There's nothing that exists that has attributes. So you absolutely need the material world. He goes on to say, 1, logical absolutes are not found in atoms, motion, heat, under rocks, etc. Right, they're concepts. 2, logical absolutes cannot be photographed, frozen, weighed, or measured. Maybe measured. I mean, they're concepts, but yeah, you can't do things that you would do to physical things, if that makes sense. 3, logical absolutes are not the product of the physical universe, since that would mean they were contingent on atoms, motion, heat, etc., and that their nature was dependent on physical existence. Well, you're describing physical existence. You're describing clumps of atoms. Like, without clumps of atoms clumping together and doing what they do, there would be no absolutes. There would be nothing to describe with the absolutes. Number 1 under this, if their nature were dependent upon physical existence, they would cease to exist when the physical universe ceases to exist. I agree with that. And I think they do, or they would. 2, if they were properties of the universe, then they could be measured the same way heat, motion, mass, etc. are measured. Since they cannot be measured, they're not properties of the universe. No, you're noting the way the universe works, that things clump together and that things have attributes, that things have an identity. Just because you can't measure it, that doesn't mean this is a concept. We're talking concepts at the end of the day. Let's go on. Number 4. But if the universe did not exist, logical absolutes are still true. I don't agree with this. There are no absolutes. Let's look at his examples. Number 1, for example, if the universe did not exist, it would still be true that something cannot bring itself into existence, and that if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. The condition of the universe does not affect these truths. There is nothing to describe. There's not a something that could bring itself into existence. There's not an A, a B, or a C. There's nothing. So it does affect these truths because there's literally nothing. There would be nothing to describe, so they couldn't be true. Number 2, for example, if the universe did not exist, it would still be true that something cannot be itself and not itself at the same time. There's nothing, though. There's nothing to describe, so something cannot be itself. Like, nothing is nothing. Like, there's nothing. And number 3, therefore, logical absolutes are not dependent on the material world. This, therefore, to me, is not warranted. Without a physical material world, there isn't a something to describe, and there are no concepts because there are no minds to come up with concepts. Popping back out to the upper level 6, again, Roman numeral 6, if I were doing this, logical absolutes are conceptual by nature. Totally agree. 1, logic is a process of the mind. Logical absolutes provide the framework for logical thought processes. Therefore, it seems proper to say that logical absolutes are conceptual by nature, since logical absolutes are truth statements about logical things. I'm fine with this, sure. Number 1, if you disagree that logical absolutes are conceptual by nature, then please explain. We don't disagree, so we're not worried about this. And number 2, if you cannot determine what they are, then how can you logically assert they're not conceptual? I'm not going to deal with this because I agree. They're concepts. Great. Let's move on to point 6.2. If they are conceptual by nature, then they are not dependent upon the physical universe for their existence. But they are, because they are products of minds. Concepts are products of minds, which are part of brains, which have to exist in a physical universe. And they're also concepts about the physical universe. Let's see what else we have here. Number 1, if they're dependent on the physical universe for their existence, then are they said to be properties of the universe the same way that red is a property of an apple? I actually think that that would be something that you can say, because an apple does not have the color red. The apple has a consistency that when light hits it, it produces the effect of red. And so the universe has clumps of things that have an identity, that have attributes, and that is an effect of the way our universe operates. So I actually think that that's a pretty good way of describing this. Kind of like gravity is not really a force, but an effect of our space-time. Let's keep going. Number 2, if logical absolutes are said to be properties of the universe, then can they be measured the same way that other properties of the universe can be measured? If they cannot, then how are they properties of the physical universe? Do you have to be able to measure everything? It just seems like the way our universe operates, things clump together and we can put a name to that, and the consistency of those has attributes. And why do we can measure the things and we can note the things. I don't know that you just have to measure everything for it to be considered a property of the universe. Number 3, if they are not properties of the universe and they are of the mind, then it seems proper to say that they are conceptual by nature and they depend on mind for their existence. And for me, I'm going to repeat myself, they are both properties of the universe and they are products of the mind, because we are the humans that have brains. Our minds are the way our brains operate, and we are able to look at the universe. We are part of the universe too, by the way. Like, we are in the universe. Our brains and our minds are part of the universe. We are part of the working. So it seems to me that it is both. They're properties of the universe and our mind, which are also part of the universe. Point 3 really is an overwrought and repetitive question of, if you don't think they're conceptual, then what are they? Since I agree that they are concepts, I'm just going to skip over this. If you're interested in reading, you can go to the webpage and look at it, but I agree these are concepts. I just kind of disagree with Slick on what concepts are, and I think that concepts need humans to have them. Humans are the only ones that we know of with minds that can have concepts. So we're going to go on to the next point. We're down to point 7 and the last thing we're going to deal with today. So this says thoughts reflect the mind, okay? Number 1, a person's thoughts are the product of that person's mind. Okay, I can agree on that. Each person has thoughts. The mind produces thoughts. 2, a mind that is irrational will produce irrational thoughts. Okay, I have lots of questions about this. Is the notion that this mind is always and constantly irrational and can only produce irrational thoughts, or that it is sometimes irrational? I mean, I think that we all are capable of having minds that are irrational, and we can all have irrational thoughts, and we can correct them. We can find out that they're irrational. So if he's being absolutist in here, I'm going to reject this. I think we all have the capability to be irrational. Number 3 says a mind that is rational will produce rational thoughts. And I don't know that it's enough just to have a rational mind. You can have wrong information that can produce irrational thoughts as well. There are emotions that can make us irrational. Like I said above, I think we all have the ability to be irrational. I think everybody has some ability to be rational. I think even people who have psychological problems can have moments of being rational. You know, people who are diagnosed with mental illnesses, they still can learn things and understand the world. Basically, there's nobody that's completely irrational, and there's nobody that's completely rational, I would say. Number 4, it seems fair to say that an absolutely perfect mind would produce perfect thoughts. I suppose so. I'm not sure that this absolutely perfect mind exists, and I'm not sure that an absolutely perfect mind would produce perfect thoughts. I'm not even sure what this means. Like, what are perfect thoughts? As far as I'm concerned, this is just a hypothetical, and I would need more discussion on this. Number 5, since the logical absolutes are transcendent absolute, are perfectly consistent, and are independent of the universe, then it seems proper to say they reflect a transcendent absolute perfect and independent mind. And this is where I'm not even quite sure what to say, because I have the impression that what is being thought here is that there is a mind that is producing the concepts that are these absolutes, that are producing the fact that the world is knowable, that things have an identity, that things are true, like something is producing that, and there is this mind that is creating that situation. And that's not how I'm seeing these logical absolutes. The fact that things have an identity and they are what they are and they aren't what they're not and all of that, there doesn't have to be a mind producing that fact. That's the way that thing exists. And then we as humans with our minds can note that things are what they are. We can note the way the universe works. I don't know that it needs a mind to make these things happen. And that's what it sounds like is happening here, that the mind is producing. I said in my last video that I thought sometimes Christians seem like really into Platonic forms, and this is why. It sounds like there is a form that exists in the God's mind, and that form is in this universe, like it's being transmitted into the universe or something like that. But let me know what you think if you have this understood a different way than me. And so let's get on to 6. We call this transcendent, absolute, perfect, and independent mind God, since a physical brain is not transcendent by nature because it is limited to physical space, and God is by definition transcendent in nature. And there's your proof of God. So in other words, these laws of logic exist in the mind of this God who is projecting it into the universe, and that's why they exist in our universe. And this is why I said at the beginning, it kind of reminded me of the fine-tuning argument or the designer argument. It is that there are values in this universe that meant that we could be brought into the universe, that life is possible, and somebody must have set those things. They must have fine-tuned the universe, or things look designed, so they must have a designer. Here it seems like things exist and have an identity, and something must have created that. There's no way they're here on their own. There must be a mind outside of everything, and that mind is making everything work. You know, what I see when I look at these logical absolutes is that we have a physical universe where atoms and molecules and all that clump together, and then there are forces and phenomena that can act upon what is out there, and these things come together and they create everything we know. These just are. It is how the universe operates, and as far as we know, it doesn't need something running all of that. It doesn't need there to be a mind outside to create these possibilities. So there you go. There is Slick's longer version of the tag argument, and he has a few objections. We will put those in another video because this is getting long enough already, but people have responded and told him what they think these logical absolutes are and how they operate and everything. And I'm not really impressed with a lot of his responses, so we will go look at those in another video. But that's all we're going to do today. What did you think of the tag argument and any of the details along the way? Put that in the comments below. I would love to hear it, and maybe you can bring some clarity to some things that are not quite clear to me in some of this muddied argumentation that Slick has here. And while you're down there commenting, you can like and subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff. And if you like what I do, you can buy me a coffee. That link is also in the description. And I'm going to be back for something different because, my gosh, I can only do so much of this tag at one time. But I hope I'll see you then. Bye for now.